So you gotta love that SSPW department, man. It's like they've got tons of stuff, and we're grabbing it left and right. And I love living in their world. And when I think about that they give us are these phenomenal things that give us the whole human perspective, right? And we as special educators start to go, hey, how do I dive deep into what's going to be most likely a very divergent piece from what is typically going to come across within a classroom. And so when we're thinking about what we're dealing with, that revolving door that Eva was talking about, all this stuff that we can't predict, and so we're unsettled because we're human and we like predictability too, right? Even people who are anarchists love predictability. How do we move forward in finding ways to make patterns and make rituals and make routines so that we can give some predictability back into our situation so that our kids and our students can feel a little bit more settled and feel a little bit more settled ourselves, right? And so, and when we think about the base of what we have, right, like the SEL signature practices, if we just take our time to say, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel, I'm just going to look through this through a different lens, depending on whether or not I'm hybrid, virtual, or in person, right? I'm just going to think about the fact that I lose my messaging, half of my messaging with my face gone, right? And how disturbing that can be. And to put it into buckets, to make it more predictable, allows us to be able to create these situations in which we feel a little bit more secure, and then hopefully our kids will feel a little bit more secure. So one of the things I want to plug, as we've been plugging stuff into the chat, is those UDL blasts. So when you are virtual or hybrid, having some new ways to access some of these practices that we're really good at, but you don't know what you don't know, those UDL blasts and some of the stuff coming out of UDL Forward is a great way to access some new ways to look at things. So when I think about the stuff that we do on a regular basis, like our welcoming and inclusion activities, things like a Four Corners activity where you're having kids, you say something out and, you go to the giraffe if you feel like this, you go to the elephant if you feel like this, the lion if you feel like this, or the peacock if you feel like this. Right? Those four corners look very different within a virtual setting. So what are some of those tech pieces that I might be able to use to be able to still have that connection? Thinking about how to do a mix and mingle, right, within a virtual world. How do I use those breakout rooms to do things like that? Or doing something like What's New and pairing kids. We can think about the technology we have to be able to create those situations still. They're just going to look a little bit different. Or if we're looking at the engaging strategies, brain breaks, and transitions, I think one of the things that pops into my mind with this is that our brain breaks might be like not computer. We get zoomed out. Like I'm sure a lot of you are feeling it a little bit now because it's after 4 o'clock on a Monday. So maybe you're a little bit more prepared, but if it was like Thursday, like our screen time is just so overwhelming right now that we need to purposely think about, okay, if I'm going to do that brain break, I'm going to think about what my kids are looking at, right? Because if I've got a kid who is already stressed out, having to keep that eye gaze and that piece of sitting on a Zoom at all times might actually cause more issues. So what am I putting in place to be able to come back and say, you know what, I'm going to actually tell them to look away from the screen for a minute and do something different. And then that last one, the optimistic closers. I think we get wrapped up a lot. I mean, how many of our conversations revolve around COVID right now? Like, and we just fall into it because that's life. This is what we're faced with. But we often admire the negative. And so when we think about purposely putting an optimistic closer in there, we're looking at how do we end a conversation moving forward, not kind of sitting in that negative piece that it's really easy to do because we're built to do it, right? Our brains are actually built to go negative before they go positive. That's why all the positive stuff's really hard to do long term, and the negative stuff's real quick to do. We're kind of built that way neurologically. So when I think about purposely putting into my practice an optimistic closer, then we've got a place to kind of go. I also want to talk about some of the stuff that we rely on that might be a little bit more specific to kid, right? We're talking about kids with IEPs, so we're zoning into where we want to be with our supports, and some of these might actually be things that are in our supplementary aids and supports, and how we're going to do that in a different way, depending if you're in person, hybrid, or virtual. Um, and and the thing is that they might be needed more now than ever, because the state of stress that our kids are in is so much higher. And so a kid who you've had for years, right? I'm a special educator, so sometimes I've had my kids for 2-3 years, and they're like, oh, we don't use our 5-point scale anymore. He's totally overusing that. He doesn't even need the visual. Yeah, those things might need to come back right now, and they might need to be something that you explicitly put back in. Now, we've got a couple of things up here as examples, but there's tons of different things that we put in place to help make our world more predictable. And so if I was moving forward and thinking, like, what can I do to get started? I'm going to look at my practices and what I'm doing and thinking about what is things that I'm putting in place to make what I'm doing more predictable, because that predictability is going to bring us down a little bit, right? Those routines, that what am I doing that's predictable, that's relationship building, right? What am I doing that actually is moving us forward in the contained space that we have, that still hits all the principles that I know that work. One of my favorite pieces to be able to help children co-serve with this piece and co-plan with this piece are those My Regulation plans. And you can find these things in the emotional and physical regulation implementation tool, which I'm hoping Alicia will throw up in there, which is also from our SSPW group, because I love them. But right on that thing that she's going to put into the chat, My Regulation plans that you see in the upper right corner help meet a kid where they're at and finding out how they're showing up. So it's a purposeful relationship building piece, and you get some information too about where we could go with how we can support that child moving forward. So some of these things we've had in place forever, right? First then chart, like pieces, or your nice visual of like how you line up and stuff, maybe not as useful virtually right now, but what can we put in place that will be like that with the virtual world? Because if you're going to create like that lanyard that you see there, that are all the most common things you say, what are the most common things you do on Zoom that might need a visual prompt? I can't wait till they come out with Zoom Kids, because, like I had a descriptor of a kindergarten teacher that was trying to get her kid back to gallery view, and then realized he doesn't know how to read. So me telling him to go click on gallery view isn't going to work, right? Where's the visual for that? So Zoom needs to figure that out. But what are we doing in our own practices that help with that gap? What are those things that will help prompt that piece that we had in place? And we have all these lovely things we have made in our classroom that we might have to think a little bit differently within the virtual world. So I challenge you to think about, where is my predictability? Where is the things I use to help that piece of a child's regulation system now that I am in a very unpredictable world?